Greetings, everyone. Welcome to African Esquire TV and also We Trash Colonialism. We have a special edition. If you do not know, yesterday morning, the president of Haiti was assassinated. And of course, leading up to this, Haiti has been very much boiling over, I think, with protests to try to get this individual out. So this program, we're going to just explore what is happening, what are the ramifications of this assassination, and what should we be doing to stand in solidarity with Haiti at this time. So I have a special guest. I have Brother Kweku Lumumba. Could you please introduce yourself and talk about what you do as far as what type of organizational work you do inside of this area?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me on the program. It's a pleasure. It's an honor. And I'm glad to be able to speak on these issues. I am Kweku Lumumba. I'm the External Relations Coordinator for COSA, which is a short or acronym for Comité Citoyen Socialiste pour Sauver Haiti, or Socialist Citizens Working Together to Save Haiti. And it's a Haitian-started, Haitian-run, Haitian-based socialist organization, and I'm just glad to be able to represent our brothers and sisters abroad.
And just for context, were you born in Haiti, or is your family Haitian?
I was not. My parents were not. But I've lived in Haiti. I moved to Haiti from the United States. I was born on the Gulf Coast and raised in Louisiana. So we are cousins. We are Creole cousins. We understand that, and coming together in the spirit of the Haitian Revolution is what allowed me to get into that space and operate and be elected to the post that I now serve.
Okay, so let's just jump right in. So yesterday, President of Haiti was assassinated. What was your first reaction whenever you heard that this happened?
I expected something like that to happen. It was swift and very precise, but every time that his house was attacked or the palace was attacked, I expected it to happen anytime, especially after he overstood his mandate past February 7th. I'm not surprised at all. So there was no shock for me. There was no surprise for me, and there was no sadness for me, because I recognized what he represented and against the interests of the people in Haiti.
So some details have come out, particularly last night. I haven't checked the news as of recently, but is your reaction still the same as it was when it initially happened, or are you a little more measured as far as more content that might be worrisome coming out?
No, I mean, we've been, as far as Haiti is concerned, we've been under occupation, under a blatant occupation from the United States since the earthquake, since 2010. And so when you see a superpower in the world exploit the lives of average brothers and sisters in the way that they did after such a tragedy, and use that to implant a political system that is a proxy for their interests, anything that's happening right now that strikes a blow to their interests is not concerning to me. It's, of course, there's a concern about the lives of the average brothers and sisters in Haiti, always. But we understand that we have been under siege. Just because the interim prime minister says that the state is under siege since yesterday, no, we've been under siege since 2010. And so we have to understand that and understand the implications of that, the consequences of that, and always be ready for situations like this, to organize our people so that we can gain control of the situations.
So I'm looking at some audience questions. They're asking, oh, why was he assassinated? Or, oh, he was a dictator. So I don't want to assume everyone's been watching this situation prior to the assassination. So can you give the people a little bit more context? What about him really led to this?
So it's important to legitimize or delegitimize the situation, his position. Jovenel Moise is called the president of Haiti, and now the former president of Haiti, but he was never actually elected properly. I was in the country when his election was supposed to have happened, and there was huge fraud. I mean, people may have been paying attention to the United States election, and all of the scandals that supposedly are around election fraud and things like that. But in Haiti, it's real. It's a real situation in which the ballots, consider this, the ballots for the election aren't even printed in the country. They're printed in Saudi Arabia and then flown over to be established in the election in Haiti. And so you have a situation in which international players decide who it is will be the president. The election is just theater, political theater. And so going through that process and recognizing that Jovenel Moise was the runner-up in the election initially, and then he was selected by the United States State Department to be the president. And there was some pushback from other candidates and from the lead candidate, Jules Celestin, at the time, which caused a delay in his rise to the post and in his inauguration. But it still happened as the international power saw fit for him to be placed in that position. And so here he is, a successor to Michel Martelly, who is of the same party, the party of the Haitian Bald Head Party, PHTK. And that party has been put in place since the earthquake by Hillary Clinton, who was the Secretary of State at the time, in her State Department, in which after the earthquake, she was not even in Haiti. She was in Africa, of all places. And she decided through her aide, Cheryl Mills, to coordinate that Michel Martelly, who at the time was not the winner of his election, he was in third place, to select Michel Martelly, put him in as president, establish this brand new party as the party of Haiti, in which the United States State Department can use as a proxy to control the politics of Haiti without having to send its own troops in. And so we see a situation in which they use proxies, whether it's the proxy party in the PHTK, a proxy military in the United Nations peacekeeping force, which was there since Aristide was ousted until recently, until 2017. And so they use these proxies in order to get their interests met without having to look like blatant colonialism. And so Jovenel Moise is just a successor in that process. And he was a rather braggadocious one after the 7th of February this year, in which constitutionally his presidential mandate ended. And he stayed in power with the United States State Department under Biden-Harris, saying that he has an extra year to be president of Haiti, that elections don't have to happen until next year. At the time, in February, this is what they said. He went on bragging in public. He was having rallies where he said, the only way you're going to get me out of power is by force. You'll get me out of here over my dead body, and boasting. You'll pack out tuyem. They can't kill me. Well, what has happened now? And so he's made this bed for himself, and now he's lying in it, literally. So, considering the history that led up to this situation, I'm not surprised. And everything that comes out of it in regard to the repercussions for his party, PHTK, then they've also decided to join him in laying in that bed. And I know that they're the ones who are really shocked and really afraid right now. They're really concerned about the situation that has been created, that they've allowed to be created in Haiti, in which there is a power vacuum, in which people who do have bad intent for the population can rise up.
You spoke a lot about the United States role and also the United Nations. Could you give concrete examples of different policies that were put into place inside of the country to benefit of the West? Sure.
So recently, let's just start with this year, some things that were being put in place. Why the extension of his presidential mandate was essential for the interests of the United States and other non-Haitian or imperial powers and concerns. There was a referendum that was supposed to be a constitutional referendum that was supposed to be happening this year. It was scheduled to happen earlier, but then it was delayed. Also, there was an election that was going to happen later on in the year, just to continue to have continuity within PHTK, have the party continue because according to the Haitian Constitution, you can't succeed yourself as president in multiple terms. You have to serve a term, and then you have to sit back. And you can run again for a second term, but it can't be successive. So what they've been doing is having, one person like Michel Martelly, who was president since the earthquake, he had to step back, and then he had his hand-picked successor, Jovenel Moise, who then ran under the party title, and then he could step back, and then Michel Martelly could run again, or somebody else could run under the party title, but they would just have alternating individuals with the same party platform. What this referendum, though, what the constitutional referendum would have done, and Jovenel was already in part doing, was to sell out the land of Haiti. And that's something that has been going on for much longer than Jovenel's presidency. But considering where Haiti started as a nation, as an empire that did not allow foreigners, particularly white people, to own land in Haiti. And now you shift to a situation in the 21st century, in 2021, in which they're trying to rework the Constitution so that the land can be bought out wholesale. And so you have land that has been bought out, or that Jovenel Moise has moved people off of their land during his presidency so that he and other people can take advantage of it and enrich themselves from the land. You have land in the central area, which is very fertile, which has been given to rich families so that they can grow their crops, that they can barter deals with capitalist corporations in the United States like Coca-Cola, so that they can make money at the expense of people who have lived there for generations. And so these are some of the things, just in short, that lend themselves to the interests of foreign capitalists and don't allow the average people in Haiti to make a living and to enrich themselves and to gain power and control over the land so that they can move forward in some sort of semblance of humanity.
You mentioned Coca-Cola. I like listing corporations because I think it's important for us to realize how a lot of the goods and products that we use are directly implicated inside of global white supremacy. Are there any others that people should know about that have taken advantage of the situation in Haiti?
Well, I don't have a list on the top of my head of corporations that we should indict. And maybe we can talk about that another time. But there are, in Haiti, people often talk about the poverty in Haiti, and that's just a political football almost at this point. But they don't talk about the wealth in Haiti. And there are billionaires in Haiti, and many billionaires in Haiti, really more than anywhere else in the Caribbean. So we have to understand that Haiti is still a place in which people can enrich themselves. People can be wealthy. And if the people, the population in general, have access to the resources in a more equitable fashion, then the entire nation can be lifted up to be one of the wealthiest nations in the Caribbean and really in the Americas once again, and be a model for other African-led or non-colonial-led nations to follow. And in similar fashion to Cuba, except Haiti can be a model of self-sufficiency for the rest of the world and the rest of the Americas, so that people aren't dependent on other superpowers in the way that Cuba had to be in regard to the Soviet Union for much of its early revolutionary history.
I've actually never heard this. So could you give a little more context when you say self-sufficiency? Because I never knew that Haiti had the most billionaires. So that's obviously a situation where there's clearly something very profitable there that's kind of being hidden from the average person. So when you say self-sufficiency, like, what does that look like?
So resource-wise, Haiti is very wealthy, and a lot of the resources are untapped. There's tons of gold in Haiti. So one of the things that the United Nations so-called peacekeeping force was doing while they spent over a decade in Haiti is they were resource mining. There's a lot of gold in the mountains of Haiti. And so in encountering brothers and sisters on the street, they recall stories of when they were watching the UN troops excavate, cut chunks out of the mountains. And it wasn't to create new roads. It was just excavation of the stone there, the ore that has the gold in it, so that can be taken out of the country. There is oil in Haiti or around in the waters of Haiti, so much so that it rivals the oil that has enriched or allowed Venezuela to lift itself up out of the poverty when Hugo Chavez became president of Venezuela. And so that's just the tip of the iceberg, because there are UN reports in which they have done surveys on how much gold is in Haiti and other resources, mineral resources that are in Haiti. And so you don't do those kinds of surveys if you're not interested in excavation. If you're there for peace and maintaining political stability, you're not going to do mineral surveys to see what's there and what can be exploited. And so when they do these things, they make a way for other international partners to come in and set up shop. Much was made about Hillary Clinton's stepbrother, who had a stake in a gold company. And so we understand, when we look at that dynamic of a Hillary Clinton rising to the position she was in State Department and then exploiting this opportunity in a land in which her honeymoon happened. Many people don't, really think about the fact that Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton had their honeymoon in Haiti. You don't honeymoon in a place that is racked with poverty and it's not attractive to you. So this is an image they put out so that money can flow in and into certain people's pockets, but they enjoy themselves. People like CNN anchors go on yachts in Haiti for vacation. And so you have millionaires, billionaires who enjoy themselves and enjoy their lives in Haiti. If you get off of the airplane in Port-au-Prince, the Toussaint Louverture International Airport, and you ride through, you take a taxi or motorcycle or a bus, you're going to pass Porsche and Mercedes-Benz dealerships. And you can live in places in the United States and not see those. So understanding that there is a tremendous wealth gap in which you have people who are living on less than $1 a day, but you have people who are living and not even counting their money because they have so much. And they own these dealerships. They can manufacture these vehicles and they can distribute their goods and their products internationally, as they do. You have things that are bottled and sold in Haiti that have been that way for decades, not decades, for centuries. And so you have centuries of wealth that have been built up in Haiti. You have people who have fled war-torn areas in the past in Lebanon, for example, and their children are rich now in Haiti. And so you have generations of foreigners who have come into Haiti, taking the hospitality of the Haitian people for their own enrichment. And now it doesn't flow back to the nation properly. It just goes to enrich themselves so that they can be participating in selecting who it is will be the power brokers in Haiti so they can maintain their wealth above everyone else.
Can you speak a little about the protests? I'll say that when I hear you lay out what's the scenario is for everyday people there, I think the big difference that I noticed inside of these protests is that I've never seen African people rising up like in recent times the way that the Haitian people really rose up against Moise. So can you speak a little bit more to that resilience of the people, that they were not going to be complacent or not going to allow this oppression to just reign over them?
Sure. That speaks to the organizational efforts of Haitian people. People don't often appreciate how organized Haitians are, especially in the country. It speaks to the resilience and the resistance that is in the DNA of our African brothers and sisters in Haiti. And it also speaks to the material conditions there. Because, especially last year, we've seen people rising up and marching, African people all over the world, and rising up against the same things. So we are a resilient people wherever we happen to be. But the material and conditions in Haiti are such that there aren't many other options. Some people in the United States, for example, say, well, we shouldn't protest. We should deal with our elected officials to do such and such and so on and so on and so forth. Or we need to focus on our economics. We have so many millions or billions or over $1 trillion that we have in our fingertips. We need to organize that economically and do our own thing so that we can have power. We have other options because of the material conditions in the United States. In Haiti, those aren't options. You don't have discussions about, oh, we have this much money pooled among us, and so we can do this, or we have this political party or this political bloc that represents our interests that we can appeal to in the Senate, so on and so forth. Those aren't options. So coming into the street and showing a unified force is one of the main options that they can get to show not only the media that they are serious and that they're united, but also show other people who may be on the sidelines. This is a strategy. One of the things about marching is not just to get exercise, and it's not just to have a spectacle, to be out and shout and to be angry, but it's to get people who may be on the sidelines to see, because they may not see it elsewhere. Once they see this large crowd walking by them, then they're more likely to join in. And the same thing happens when we party, because in Haiti, there's something they call rara, which they go through the streets and they play the music and then they dance. And it happens around Carnival, or what some people may call Mardi Gras. But it can happen anytime. It happens periodically. And when that happens, the band leaders usually start it off and they go through different neighborhoods and people join in the revelry. And so the same concept happens around the protests, these marches. The leaders walk through the neighborhoods and they have their chants, they have their slogans, and people on the sidelines take attention, and then they can join in, and it continues, and it gets louder and it gets longer, and you see these trails of people who join in. And so it's an opportunity to bring people into the movement. And then after the marches are done and after the cameras are turned off, then you have opportunity to organize people, have discussions about what it is that they need, what it is that needs to be done. And so capacity for various organizations are built over the course of the past couple of years during these protests. Yes, the protests were on social media, they were on mass media. But after that, what wasn't on mass media and wasn't on social media were the coalitions that were formed from different organizations that operate in different regions of the country that were able to come together after these and then organize to see how it is that we can build capacity and build a plan for moving forward with or without Jovenel Moise in the country.
Okay, so I want to go back to the current situation, particularly with the Biden administration. I was so appalled whenever he released a statement essentially saying that Moise can stay in power another year. Outwardly, it's just crazy how brazen U.S. imperialism is, outwardly saying what he will, saying what's going to happen inside of a foreign country that should have nothing to do with the United States. Did him releasing that, I guess, rally up the people even more, because it kind of showed outwardly that the United States is the one who is behind the scenes inside of a lot of these things?
It did. And, that's where the diaspora comes into play. And I speak about the diaspora in terms of, yes, people who are born in Haiti or their parents are born in Haiti, but those of us that weren't, because and before I get to your question, understanding the identity of Haiti or Haitian or Haitian is something that was formed in a revolutionary space for all of us. It's not something that lends itself to nation state philosophy of that sort of national philosophy or colonial philosophy that the United States follows, but one in which it said any person that is seeking freedom can step foot on Haiti, on the land, and be free. And all of us who are considered African people, Black people, can come and be Haitian. It wasn't a situation. It's like, oh, who's your father? Who's your mother? Who's your grandfather? Who's your grandmother? You come and you're about the character of being Haitian, being Haitian, meaning that you have to be a good child to your parents, a good parent to your children, a good brother, a good sister, a good soldier. You know, these are the character qualifications of being Haitian. It was no thing, oh, you got to apply and, you know, do this nationalization thing or live here 5 years like the Constitution currently says. But it was a thing of character. And if you did not live up to that character, then you lost your Haitian identity. And so we can all be Haitian in that way as part of the diaspora is concerned. And so that role of deciphering these things for our brothers and sisters in Haiti is ours. To say, look, we paid attention to this and we can share this information, that this is the United States plan in regard to Haiti. And when we share that, then that helps them galvanize people on the ground and help them understand, look, this is what the United States is actually doing to our country. This is their interest. This is their position on what's going on. It's against our interests. We don't want Jovenel Moise to be in power anymore. But the United States, the president of the United States, his State Department is saying Jovenel Moise has another year. So they're against democracy. They're against constitutional order. While on one side of their face, they're saying they're pro-democracy. They're leaders of the democratic world, of the free world. And then they support democracy and democratic institutions. But that's not true, as you can see. And so we have to be able to translate that and share that with our brothers and sisters so that they can use it. And they did use that effectively to organize and to oppose Jovenel Moise until his demise.
And can you state clearly, I have not read the Haitian Constitution, but I seen the State Department, they did a press conference yesterday and they justified, supporting Moise. And they said he had, according to the Haitian Constitution, he had 1 more year. So can you say plainly, he did not have 1 more year according to the Haitian Constitution?
He did not have 1 more year according to the Haitian Constitution. His argument, and the argument of the United States, was that because of him not effectively being able to exercise his power as president for approximately a year, he has the right to have an extra year to do so. And that goes back to what I was saying about the irregularities or the fraud in the election, in which he was the second place person in the election under Jude Celestin and the Parti La Paix, or Party for Peace. And then somehow he was listed as number 1. And so there was a organized within the electorate and within those candidates to say, no. This needs to be investigated. And it was, and all of it was constitutional. All of it was constitutional. The investigation happened, and then they determined that they needed to have a recount. They didn't vote again. They didn't do the election again, but they went through constitutional processes to make sure that everything was in order. Of course, once again, it happened that Jovenel Moise, the numbers were fudged so that he stayed in power, but he got what he wanted, and the United States got what they wanted in having their man in office. And so the effective date for him being president did not change. It wasn't shifted because of that, just because there was a recount, any more so than Joe Biden's situation, in which there were recounts that happened in different states and in the United States at the behest of lawyers of the Trump campaign. That's the constitutional right of the campaign to say, we want a recount. And that happens, but that doesn't change the date. And so Biden doesn't get extra months as president just because he said, well, I could have done this, this, and this if Trump hadn't protested this, this, and this. That's not how it works. And so his mandate, according to the Constitution, ended on February 7th, 2021. But in spite of that, they allowed things to go on so that he could have an extra year to do what it is that he was assigned to do by the United States, that he wasn't able to do because of the constitutional recount that happened.
So disgusting to me. Could you speak about, is there an opposition party that is more representative of the people inside of Haiti, or has not yet formed?
There is not an opposition political party, meaning a party that's running candidates right now that is more representative of the people. There are opposition political parties that have run in previous elections, and namely the last one, and have candidates now, but it's very factional. They're very splintered in their representation of the masses. They have areas that they represent, but as far as the masses as a whole of the nation, there is not that one kind of galvanizing thing like in the late 80s, early 90s that came out of the Duvalier regime, where you had Lavalas form as a people's party that was able to galvanize over 90% of the electorate to then lift up a president in the early 90s. There's not that sort of party, but there are coalitions of political organizations like the one that I represent that represent different areas of the masses and different interests within the masses, and have been coming together over the past several years to solidify those interests and solidify those sectors of people. And so we expect out of that will come those sort of political parties that can represent the masses in whole and not in part.
Can you get into some specific human rights abuses that Moise committed that the United States ignored? I've heard about forced rapes, kidnapping, or rape's always forced, but rapes, kidnappings. I've heard of disappearances. I've heard of those types of things. Is there more that I hit the nail on the head?
So one thing, and this may be ironic, is assassinations. Jovenel Moise has been sending his goons to assassinate people in the streets, not even like quietly in their homes and knocking them off in the streets. You have people's blood who's been running in the streets, who have been active on the front lines of this struggle, whether they were leading marches or leading organizations, who have been assassinated, men, women, and children. Understand that children as well have been assassinated, who have spoken up according to their interests as Haitian people by the henchmen of Jovenel Moise. And so him being assassinated is almost, I've heard it circulated as a case of chickens coming home to roost, because he's been assassinating innocent and unarmed. I mean, it's not even a situation of where you have like an armed faction that's risen up against him, and he's like, well, this is a matter of the state versus attempted coup or a military faction that's trying to take over the country. These are people who strategically are unarmed, in spite of all of the weapons that have been flowing into Haiti from the United States. I'm talking about military grade weapons that have been flowing into Haiti in crates. These activists, these organizers have not picked up those weapons against Jovenel Moise. They've deliberately been nonviolent in that they're not arming themselves to fight the state. And these are the people that have been assassinated by Jovenel Moise in poor communities like La Saline, which has gotten some publicity internationally because it was considered a massacre in which the state forces went in and were able to just massacre people wholesale in the same way that happened in the 90s with Cité Soleil, which is another famous slum in Haiti. And so you have these innocent people, these impoverished people that have been killed wholesale by Jovenel Moise. You have these bandits that have been empowered by Jovenel Moise to be his covert military arm and terrorize the people in the same way that Duvalier created his Tonton Macoute, who are not the Haitian military, were not the Haitian police. They were another force that he created, like a private force, to then do his bidding against anybody who may oppose him. And so Jovenel Moise did the same thing with these, what they call gangs in Haiti right now. And what you have these chiefs of these gangs that have been empowered and been armed by Jovenel Moise and paid by him and by his handlers to create instability in places where organizations have been rising up and been organizing.
It's crazy. I think I recorded it last week. It was a video I recorded about two journalists who were or journalists and activists who were just killed. I'll probably release it over the weekend. But people just speaking out, like you said, nonviolently. And yet, it's crazy when you hear the United States go at other countries for much smaller, quote unquote, infractions. And yet they completely turned a blind eye to these killings.
Yeah, it's hypocrisy at the highest level. Instead of just being in favor of human rights and advocating for human rights and really advocating for democracy and sovereignty of a nation like Haiti, the United States follows its own plan and its own narrative and just blatantly lies. For anybody who reads, like you and your listeners or your viewers, just blatant lies on live TV to say that this is what our interests are, and this is what's happening, and this is what we support, and this is what we denounce, in spite of the fact that they are doing everything that they can to support human rights violations in Haiti.
Okay, so I think a lot of people have been asking about this. The assassination, there was video going around, and there's reports of people yelling out DEA. There's reports of people speaking Spanish and English. I have a whole conspiracy about why they're pushing this narrative, but of course, facts have to come out. What do you make of those reports?
Well, first, let's deal with the DEA issue. Jovenel Moïse, before he became president, was known as the Banana Man. And that was because he supposedly had this very lucrative banana plantation in which he grew bananas and exported them. And that's supposed to be of how he got his wealth prior to becoming president. Upon an investigation, it was like there is no sort of lucrative banana plantation that he owns. He does own, a plantation, but it's not a lucrative operation. And so it was a front, and this has been publicized since his campaign. It was a front for drug trafficking. That Jovenel Moïse has been involved in drug trafficking, moving drugs from South America into the United States since before he ran for president. And that's in part what this Pièce de Cap party helps to facilitate, is the continued trafficking of illegal drugs from South America into the United States, which of course has to be facilitated by the United States CIA. That we've seen that time and time again, whether the poppy's coming from Afghanistan or the cocaine is coming from Colombia, it's always facilitated by the United States, and the president of the United States knows about it and gets reports about it. So him being president and being in that position where he is a facilitator of this means that he is under the watchful eye and working hand in hand with the DEA, the United States Drug Enforcement Agency. And what happens with this is how the United States keeps their puppets on a leash, on a string. They have them before they even use them, meaning we've got dirt on you before we use you. And so now we'll use that as a means to control you. So if we no longer have a use for you, then we can pull this string, pull you out. That now, okay, here's the DEA, boom, we got you on drug trafficking charges. Now you're going to prison. Same thing happened with Guy Philippe, for example. Guy Philippe is one of the people who led the coup against President Aristide, the second time in which he was ousted. Guy Philippe was trained militarily by the United States in South America. And he was also involved when he was when he was the chief of police in Haiti, involved in facilitating drug trafficking. And so by pulling him, they were able to use him and manipulate him in all of these things that they wanted to happen politically in Haiti. Well, recently he ran for a political post the same year that Jovenel Moïse ran for president. What happened with Guy Philippe is before, even though he won the election, he wasn't sworn in, so he didn't have immunity. He didn't have diplomatic immunity. So before he could swear in, the DEA came in and got him and then brought him and imprisoned him in Florida. because it's like, we don't want you, like, that's not your role. We don't want you to have diplomatic immunity so you can do whatever you want and cut the strings. We need to keep these strings on you. So that's what they did. So with Moise, we have to understand that the DEA tactic of somebody coming to your door and saying, we're DEA, and your security detail then disarms, means that there's a relationship. I mean, if somebody comes to your door and you allow them in like that, that means that's a good friend. You're not surprised. And if you're surprised, then you say, all right, prove it. Who are you? The police come to your door. You don't just, hey, come on in, unless you're friends. You say, all right, can I see your badge? Can you stick it under somehow in the window or something? I'm not just going to let you in and have a conversation with me until you prove who you are. And so that's the first thing. That's why that worked, because the people who did this, who assassinated him, knew his relationship with the DEA and knew his relationship as a drug trafficker, a drug dealer. And so the other issue of Spanish speaking, it's funny because people tend to forget that Haiti is part of Latin America. Cuba is right next door, and there are plenty of Cuban-trained doctors in Haiti. There are plenty of Cuban doctors in Haiti that have been serving the people for decades. The half of the landmass is occupied by Dominican Republic, which is primarily Spanish speaking, or almost exclusively Spanish speaking. And within Haiti, you have this flow of people from Latin America, including Haitians, who are exposed to Spanish and speak Spanish, in addition to English. I mean, as long as the United States has been in this colonial relationship with Haiti, the United States has never been a Spanish-speaking nation. And so English is something that is learned and taught, even though it's not often spoken by people. It's not something that is a foreign language to people. It's not heard in Haiti, just like Spanish. And so the fact that people could hear Spanish and English being spoken is not really a surprising thing, because if you live in Haiti, you're going to hear Spanish eventually, and you're going to hear English eventually. It's just that the main language is Creole, and French also operates on a government and a commercial level as well. But Spanish is part of Latin America, and Haiti is part of Latin America. So that's not really a surprising thing, but it's just something that they've been using to create some confusion and create some speculation about what it is that happened and why it happened, so that people can kind of be off-put about what really happened.
And then also, I'm sure you saw the press conference of, was it the ambassador to Haiti? He said that he believes these are trained mercenaries. What do you make of that?
So it was very well organized, no doubt. It was a very high-level operation, because if it were just average people off the street that happened to get in there, there would have been some lives lost on both sides. But this was precise. They knew what they were doing. They planned it ahead, and they worked it out. What also happened is Jovenel Moise was tortured. His corpse, the arms were broken, his eyes were removed. And so this was something that was personal. So it wasn't just simply, if you're a mercenary, you go in, you do the job, and, you get out. But they went in and they did the job and they got out. But there was a personal message here. They talked to Jovenel Moise before they killed him. They broke his arms. You don't break the arms of a corpse. What's the point? They broke his arms before they killed him. They removed his eyes before they killed him. And his wife, it's interesting about his wife. She was shot, but she wasn't killed. They could have easily killed her. They shot her in a place on her body which was probably going to have her wheelchair bound for the rest of her life. So they delivered a message that we can kill you, but we're not going to kill you. But we are going to incapacitate you because of how you've been enriching and enjoying yourself off of the actions and the fraud of your husband. And so they delivered a message, and this was personal. It wasn't a situation of, we're just going to pay some mercenaries to come in and do this. They knew Jovenel Moise. Jovenel Moise knew them. And what happened between the two of them had to do with some falling out or some disagreement about that relationship. That is clear.
Do you have any beliefs? I mean, obviously you wouldn't say who it is if you knew, but so you do believe that it was people possibly on the ground who have been trying repeatedly to get rid of him?
But not necessarily trying to get rid of him, but at the point in which they made that decision, it was like, okay, it's time to get rid of him because of whatever happened in that relationship. Obviously, he wasn't keeping his side of the bargain. It could be related to the drug, like we said before. It could be related to the drugs. It could have been cartel. Simple as that. I mean, people have to consider how many things that he was involved in before he became president. And so if he becomes president, he has this ego thing that he feels like nobody can kill me, like he said in public, or you have to get me out of here over my dead body. And he feels that emboldened where he can bring in the military of Haiti to be his private military force. And he feels like nobody can stop him. He's got the United States behind his back. Then maybe he decided, I don't have to live up to the bargains or to the agreements that I had with you before I became president. I can do what I want to do with the drugs and with the money now. So it could have been as simple as a cartel issue. It's like, okay, you think you can do that? Well, we'll show you that no, you're not as powerful as you think, and you can be removed. It could have been an internal faction within the party itself, even that determined like, okay, he's not doing what it is that he needs to do. So, and we want the power that he has or the access that he has. So let's remove him. There are a lot of different possibilities here in regards to who it could have been, but it's clear that it wasn't some mercenary group that was just paid off by, especially not by the population that can't afford to pay off some sort of high level mercenary group like that. It was definitely something that was beyond the scope of the average brother and sister who's been marching in the streets. It's not in their pay grade to be able to pull off an operation of mercenaries like that.
So, of course, the big worry right now is that you have Joe Biden, Kamala, everyone on Capitol Hill in America. They're releasing statements. It seems like they're looking to possibly intervene. Do you have any concerns about that possibility?
Sure, absolutely, because they've done it before. They've intervened before. The problem that they're having right now is that they can't call this a coup. The pattern of the United States has been to set up coups so that they can come in and intervene militarily. And that's what they did in the beginning of the 21st century, when they set the stage to have the United Nations come in and occupy, when they brought Aristide out by military force. They did it in the 90s, same thing, came in. They did it in the, they did it since the beginning of the 20th century, in which the Marine Force occupied the island before the United Nations was created. That's how they had to do it. They couldn't do it through proxies. And so there's been about 100 years, a little bit more of 100 years of the United States operating in that same pattern of, okay, there's a coup of the presidency or the government. And so we're going to come in, we're going to bring our military in, we're going to occupy, we're going to reorganize things according to our interests. They've been doing it for over 100 years now, very overtly. And they have agreements on the books that are still there that give them the right to do that. The Haitian United States Convention of 1915 is one in which they installed a president that then signed this document for the United States to have the right to intervene militarily anytime they see fit. And so they set those stages, but without a coup, without being able to say these people were and it was an insurrection or something like that, that was an overthrow of the government. None of these people are trying to take power. They didn't show their faces and say, hey, we're taking over. It was nothing. They disappeared. So the United States has that problem, not being able to say, oh, we have to intervene to reestablish order because people are trying to take over. That's not the case. So they're trying to figure out how they can do it. With the United Nations, there's going to have to be a vote in the Security Council. So it's not something that can happen immediately. But I suppose that we'll just see how that goes, because we do know that the United States has a lot of personal and commercial interests in Haiti they want to preserve, political interests, and they're not going to let that go lightly.
My final question, in the meantime, while, obviously they're making their plans, what do you feel that African people, wherever we are, should be doing to support the people on the ground in Haiti?
Well, it's important to stay abreast in news, to stay informed, number one. So I'm grateful for your program that is allowing us to do that and to share with African people throughout the world the information that is coming from IET with a clear African perspective. And then also if you want to support, then it's important to support Haitian organizations on the ground that have been vetted by the people, and not just like some foreign organization that has planted themselves there to enrich themselves and give the people a percentage. But Haitian organizations like the one that I represent that actually has people that are doing work according to the interests of the people on the ground and organizing the people and not getting paid. I don't get paid for this. I don't get a salary from the organization like the Red Cross people do. This is something that I'm doing because it's important work that has to be done in a revolutionary way. And so you have organizations like ours that represent the interests of the people. The organizers aren't getting a salary. So whatever support is given for the work to be done and not for people to be paid so that they can just sit back and say, well, I'm a revolutionary, or I'm doing this, or I'm blah. No. So finding those kind of organizations is important if you actually want to move Haiti forward.
How do people vet that, though? Because, that's a very crucial issue. And you could also shout out your organization again in case anyone didn't hear you in the beginning.
Sure. So the organization is COSA, Comité Citoyen Socialiste pour Sauver Haïti, Socialist Citizens Working Together to Save Haiti. The website is COSA, KOSSSA.com. And the phone number for the External Relations Office is 404-884-6638. That's 404-884-6638. And the website, you can access the External Relations Office there too to get more information or to say how you'd like to support and communicate. Vetting is a difficult thing because there are tons of organizations. They all have websites and they all have good presentations. But being able to communicate, there's nothing wrong with communicating with organizations and like, show me your work, show me your track record. Don't just tell me that you're working for children and show a whole bunch of children, but show me your track record. My organization, for example, we bring people down to Haiti. We haven't brought anybody down this year or last year because of the pandemic, but we brought people down to actually see. It's not just going around soliciting and saying, hey, give us money. They're like, no, here's an opportunity to come to IET, connect with people on the ground. They'll tell you what's going on and you can connect and stay connected. And so there's nothing wrong with doing that sort of vetting. And that's the sort of vetting that has to happen with IET. You have to make direct connections with people and vet yourself to say, okay, where's the money going? And, let me see the institutions. Let me see the work that's being done. That's what has to happen if you want to support real organizations, because there are a lot of fronts for money laundering operations in Haiti that look really good. They put a lot of nice paint on the front, but on the back end, all that money is going to somebody's pocket and not to the people.
Thank you so much, Brother Kweku. Do you have any final words for the people?
Well, continue the resistance, continue to organize, and continue to believe in African people and African solidarity, African power to determine our own destiny, because we've been doing it throughout our entire existence on this planet, before imperialism was a thing, before colonialism was a thing. And so we have the capacity, we have the power, and we have the history to defeat imperialism and to defeat colonialism and to be a self-determined people. So don't give up the fight, continue the revolution, and see you next time.
See you, and thank you so much. I hope you guys had some questions answered. I know I certainly did. So thank you so much again. Continue to watch the situation in Haiti. Continue to support the people.
Thank you.
Thank you.